You're alone in the woods. It's midnight. It's pitch black. The moon is full. And in the distance, you hear the howling of hungry creatures. Well, this is what happens when you want to go camping. Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of Phenomena, where I, your ghostly host with the most, basically Beetlejuice, will choose a topic from horror, sci-fi, and fantasy media that I find trendy, ask a bunch of questions about it, see if I can answer my own questions, and if I can't, I will turn it over to you guys in the comments, and we just have a ball. That's it. A monster ball. A monster bash. Yes, we will be talking about the hairy boys of the monster universe. And my favorite horror movie monster, werewolves. Also, shout out to my mom for getting me this shirt. It's great. Thanks, Mom. Before we get into it, again, I just want to clarify. For those of you who don't know what a werewolf is. Got it? Alright, awesome. Alright, so where do we start? The questions that I have today, they really do delve deeper into the popularity of the werewolf than the questions that I had last week with the vampire. Mostly because I already knew that vampires were super popular throughout most of film history. Werewolves, on the other hand, I feel like don't get the same amount of love. You do have werewolf-centric stuff, but not as much and not as popular as vampire-related stuff. And also, even if you have a movie where there's supposed to be monsters, right? Sort of like a Van Helsing ensemble and Avengers for monsters. Again, you don't really have that much going on with the werewolf. I mean, he's just in there. You know, they're just in there just to be in there. And most of the time, it's not really that compelling or interesting or funny even. They're just there, and you make a lot of weird dog jokes with them. So strap in, come with me, so we can get into the meat and potatoes of this episode. My first question might make a few of y'all fight. Actually, all three of these questions might make everybody fight, depending on whether you're a werewolf fan or not. But bear with me. Why were werewolf movies not as popular as vampire movies? Now, some of you may already be whipping out that keyboard and being like,
there are plenty of werewolf movies that are popular.
Okay, I can semi-agree with you, but then I thought about it for, the research purposes for this video. And I, looked up as many werewolf movies as I could, and I had to rewatch a few things. These are not as well-known or as widespread as vampire movies, which is interesting. Some of the classics. You know about The Wolfman in 1941. I mean, the first real werewolf movie where Lon Chaney is wolfed out. My dude is hairy. He represented all of us hairy freaks out there. You know how it is. After that, you kind of had the Wolfman showing up in other movies as opposed to being the Dracula situation where there were vampire movies aplenty. Maybe it's because people thought it would be easier to just, be a vampire. Pale face, some fangs, and some contacts if you're trying to be fancy. Dress like a goth. It's easy, right? When it comes to werewolves, maybe, and this is just me surmising here, but it's possible that it just requires a little bit more work. And that's why it's a little bit harder to kind of be interested in the whole werewolf thing. Now, I know we got plenty of monster lovers out there. It's not to say that any books that are about werewolves aren't popular, or any comics about werewolves that aren't popular. I still feel like the werewolf movies that I watched growing up were not as widely known as the vampire movies I watched growing up. I have a list here of some movies. Again, kind of like what I did with the vampire movies. And maybe you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about, because there is kind of a difference in the popularity of the werewolf. You have werewolf-centric movies, and then you have movies that like just have werewolves in them. Teen Wolf, Fright Night, Ginger Snaps, The Wolfman, The Howling, Underworld, Rise of the Lycans, Twilight, Cursed, Dog Soldiers, Trick or Treat, The Monster Squad, Silver Bullet, Wolf Cop. So based on this list of movies that I've given you, right, you can sort of see what I mean by werewolf-centric movies that are primarily about werewolves, and then movies that are horror or supernatural related that have just a werewolf in them. It's cool, it's still awesome, but it's not a werewolf movie. So this next question has more to do about the effectiveness of werewolf movies as opposed to vampire movies. Now, for the werewolf movies, do you think that they were of better quality than the vampire movies that would come out? Some of y'all are already fighting, and or you're thinking about it and you're like, I don't really know. To me, I think there are certain werewolf movies that are like better in terms of story and prosthetics and special effects and things like that than certain vampire movies. A big one for me, and I know this is a pretty big cult classic for everybody here, An American Werewolf in London. Like, it is the most well-known retro werewolf movie out there, and everybody should know about it. And if you don't, watch it. But if you're like not at the right age to watch an R-rated werewolf horror movie, watch it with someone or don't watch it at all. Please save yourself. The best part of any werewolf movie is about the transformation sequence. It's about the bones cracking and the skin peeling and the hair growth, and the next part of that is the gaining confidence, getting ripped and shredded out of nowhere. And then you kind of have the final stage of the werewolf story, which can diverge into two lanes usually. One lane being you give into the evil, aka the werewolf curse, or the other path, which is you use the werewolf curse as your saving grace. Long story short, to answer this question, like in its entirety, I think that werewolf movies give us a bit more quality because it requires more of a fine-tooth combing of the special effects and the storyline, and trust me, there are plenty of bad werewolf movies out there, but I feel like the werewolf is used in a very interesting way to explain social issues or used as a metaphor for other things, which leads into my last question for this episode. Now, for those of you who are huge film buffs and who like to flex that brain meat to be all analytical and stuff, maybe you guys will have like a better time answering this than other people. Again, don't take it too seriously.
It's just for fun.
Do you think that the werewolf as like a metaphor is a good metaphor in films? And after watching a lot of monster films in my day, the werewolf movies tend to be a little bit more serious because they deal with the idea of absolutely losing control. And vampire movies do that as well. They do. But for some reason, I just don't see them as intense or as serious as the more werewolf side of things. Maybe that's just me. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say, but I feel like the werewolf element is kind of a good metaphor for a lot of things, a lot of serious issues, a lot of internal issues that we all have. We all have that side of us where we're like,
gosh, I wish I could slap this person right now.
But I won't do that because that's not socially acceptable, right? We all do. Don't lie. You do. You've had this moment in your life somewhere. That's kind of the interesting part of it. You have that impulsiveness that the werewolf side represents. It's kind of like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing, only instead of it being a scientific separation of personalities, it could be natural, like from Teen Wolf where he just inherited his werewolfness, or it's a curse, where you're bitten by a werewolf or someone cursed you to be a werewolf. So I find using the werewolf as like a metaphor for other things is more effective. So that's all I have for you guys today. Tell me what you think. Leave some comments, ask questions, hit me up on Insta or on Tumblr, whichever you would prefer. But I want to hear you guys' opinions on this. That's all for the second episode, and tune in next week for another phenomenal